Today, we are going to be ranking in a tier list every turn-based strategy RPG that I have ever played. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Had to give a little bit of a YouTube intro there. So, how this is going to be working, and if you're watching the video right now, well, welcome. Good to have y'all, video viewers. I'm glad to be back from the Japan trip. If you're at all interested in learning about said trip, I'm going to be putting out a vlog sometime in the near future, and you can find the VOD for this stream. I'll have it linked in the description, so you can go and see the first couple of hours that are all basically talking about current events in my life and how the Japan trip was. You can go and check that out. But now that I'm back, I've been kind of throwing this idea around in my head where I want to put on a list every turn-based strategy RPG that I've ever played, and I think I've got them all on here. If I forgot any, my apologies. We'll have to do a revised one at some point as I play new ones and as I potentially remember any ones that I've missed, but I tried to be really thorough here. I think I've got them all. So you'll notice here we have a few different tiers, some of which are a little unorthodox. We have the Final Fantasy Tactics tier, which we will have more things than just FFT there, but it's kind of the cream of the crop. And then at the very bottom, we have the Aedis Eclipse Generation of Chaos tier, which I kind of felt like I had to do, seeing as how I did a video talking about how that game is the single worst turn-based strategy RPG I've ever played. From there, we have our normal A, B, C, and D. Final Fantasy Tactics tier took over the S tier. And then a section of couldn't finish where I wouldn't say it is necessarily a terrible game. That would fall down into the Aedis Eclipse tier, but maybe a game that just wasn't quite compelling enough or was a little too annoying or something along those lines that I personally couldn't finish it, but I wouldn't outright decry it as a terrible game. It might resonate with other people, that kind of thing. So those are the tiers that we're going to be working with. We have a number of titles here, so we're going to get moving. Now, some of these games I have not yet finished, not because I can't finish them, but just because I haven't had the time. Things like Disgaea, where's my cursor here? Disgaea falls under that list. Last Spell, same, different stuff like that. I intend to finish those games. There's nothing wrong with them. I just haven't had the time, so we're going to be ranking them in a way that I feel is appropriate for what they bring to the table without necessarily being like, oh, I can't finish them. They belong down here in Aedis Eclipse, whatever. But yeah, I've not finished all of these titles. Keep that in mind. Note as well, there are some games like Blind Coco's own Gales of Nayeli that I've only played demos of, so I don't have them on this list as it stands. In future iterations of those lists, then we will have that type of game on here too. Games that are maybe in early access, but otherwise a full-fledged title, like Together in Battle, the brainchild of Sinister Design, who's also here in the chat, are going to be on here because I feel like I've put in enough time with it to be able to judge it semi-fairly. Okay. Let's begin. First of all, I have these two up front because, of course, we've got two entire tiers dedicated to them. Final Fantasy Tactics. It's going in the Final Fantasy Tactics tier. This should not be a surprise to anybody. It is my favorite game of all time, and I do personally believe it is still the single greatest turn-based strategy RPG of all time. Period. No notes, no argument, no discussion. It just is. You could maybe make the argument that other games do certain mechanics better, are better graphically, have better quality of life features, are more refined. But I think the overall package of FFT is just too high quality to not have it be what the cream of the crop S tier bar is resting at. So that's where it's going to be. Aedis Eclipse Generation of Chaos, on the other hand, is all the way at the bottom. We're going to scroll this up a little bit so we can actually see these tiers properly. Aedis Eclipse Generation of Chaos, as I discussed in my video discussing why it is the single worst strategy RPG I've ever played, does not meet that same standard of having all of its disparate parts come together to make an incredibly complete package. Where Final Fantasy Tactics has its problems and has things that could be refined, made better, to make an overall more polished experience while still retaining everything that is good that it did. Aedis Eclipse has glimmers of greatness in it that are just bogged down by way too much trash. And without going back to the drawing board and redesigning the game from the ground up and re-recording voice lines and sound effects and doing new art and doing new mechanical design, completely distinct from what already exists, it's never going to reach that overall complete package landmark. Okay, now continuing on, now that we've got the pinnacle and the floor set up, we can discuss everything else here. As needed, I will move my cam around if we wind up blocking anything, and by all means, feel free to discuss. Okay, we're going to go through everything that we have here now, starting off with Baldur's Gate 3. Now, obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the best games ever made, bar none. From an objective standpoint, it is better than Final Fantasy Tactics. I will not dispute that. However, while I do believe that functionally it serves as an example of a turn-based strategy RPG, even though it's not grid-based, even though obviously it's in the overall umbrella of CRPGs, I do still think it counts. And in that vein, it's not as fleshed out as other strategy RPGs. There's not as much depth. Even though there's a lot of things that you can do, and there's a lot of different mechanics at play, it doesn't have the density that other strategy RPGs have. That said, what it does have is immaculate. All the different animations, all the different combinations of different spells, abilities, classes, all that type of fun stuff, the way you can level, the way you can build out your unique characters, the way you can approach different combat scenarios, it does have a ton going for it. So I think it very solidly lands in A tier. I really can't argue it being anywhere else. Ignoring the CRPG aspects of it, of running around, managing inventories, exploring an open world, solving puzzles, etc., 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 the gameplay itself and the different mechanics at play that facilitate it are still phenomenal, and I love it for that. I think it's extremely strong in that regard. All right, Crimson Tactics. I know this is a very contentious one. I still maintain that it is a very solid game, and that's what we're going to be judging it based on. I think Crimson Tactics is a very solid middle-of-the-road B tier. There's a lot of things that I would like to see changed about it that are never going to, unfortunately. I love the way that it actually tries to do things with mounts, that it had interesting things going on with what is an otherwise very Final Fantasy Tactics grid-based system with like diagonal attacks, different types of status effects, things like that. I've enjoyed every second that I've played with Crimson Tactics, and I desperately need to go back and finish playing what's there. There's just some things that they tried to do, and I love the presence of those things. Like, again, I always go back to the mounted system that needed to just be fleshed out more to bump it up higher. That said, I do think for any sort of turn-based strategy enthusiasts out there, it's absolutely worth going and picking up. It's got compelling enough characters. It's got a compelling enough story. I like the animations. I like the designs. And I definitely like the mechanical design. There's a lot of good there, and it makes it a very solid middle-of-the-road game. Now, Dark Deity, to me, is absolutely A tier. And yes, of course, there's going to be a huge world of difference between Dark Deity and Baldur's Gate, but we're riding off of vibes right now, all right? And I personally think that Dark Deity got way more hate than it deserved. It was buggy when it first came out, sure. I know that because I was in the trenches helping the devs solve bugs by discovering them and sending them footage when the game first dropped. But the overall core of an indie Fire Emblem experience with beautiful character designs, great animations, super interesting branching promotion paths and things like that was just a ton of fun. It's got so much replayability with various like reverse recruitment modes or like fixed modes, different things like that. The way they handle their actual weapon systems where you don't have consumable weapons, but you have upgradable categories of weapons that have wildly different stat distributions. Some of the different creative class ideas that they had, or even just creative character setups, the usable skills, things where you can like chain enemies in place or teleport people around, different things like that were a ton of fun. I love this game. I still go back to it semi-regularly just to play it for a while, just because I enjoy it. If you haven't played Dark Deity and you're a fan of Fire Emblem, this is absolutely an entry that you need to go check out. And now with Dark Deity 2 on the horizon, with all of the different changes to quality of life, improvements to graphics, visual design, mechanical design, all that type of stuff, I think there's going to be a ton of cool stuff to check out going forward. Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy of the Holy War is S tier. Easily. This is our first Fire Emblem title. And now note, I do have, this is something I should have mentioned at the top, but I do have all the different Fire Emblem titles that I've played, which is, tactically speaking, all of them, the mainline titles anyway, listed here because they provide such distinct experiences, and they do have a pretty decent range in terms of quality, or at least quality to me. So we have all of them on here. We're going to be ranking them all separately. Compare that to Super Robot Wars, which is on here, but is represented by just one spot, because, to me, while there's obviously distinctions between all the Super Robot Wars games, they're homogenous enough that, to me, you can rank the series in one spot. At its core, the series has always been, beyond the very earliest entries before they kind of knew what they were doing, very similar. And that's part of what I love about it. But I think that means that you can pretty easily rank it as one homogenous entity. If you want to do a tier list of all the Super Robot Wars games on their own, you could definitely find differences, for sure. But for a list like this, Fire Emblem has enough differences, while Super Robot Wars is similar enough that I think we can condense SRW into one thing. Just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, Genealogy of the Holy War is absolutely S tier. It's got what I would say is probably the best story. I think Genealogy edges out Three Houses for me just a little bit in all of Fire Emblem. It's obviously pretty outdated at this point graphically, and there's definitely some rough edges, we'll say, in terms of game design that I think could be filed down or modified to make for a little bit of a smoother experience. But the fact that people like Canadian Animator Guy, who've never seen Genealogy, who've never played it, can, 3 years ago now, go in and play it for the first time and absolutely love it, tells you everything you need to know, or that you need to know about the sheer mechanical quality of the game. I think it's one of the pinnacles of Fire Emblem, and as such, since Fire Emblem is my favorite game series of all time, it absolutely deserves to be an S tier alongside Final Fantasy Tactics. It is one of the top pieces of Fire Emblem media that we've ever gotten, easily. Sloan doesn't have quality of life, but sometimes, oh my god, its peak. Yep. Absolutely. There's a reason that people still recommend that new players to the franchise go and play it, despite it being older than a lot of people who are playing Fire Emblem now. Like, it's just worth it, man. It really is. Tactics Ogre Reborn, y'all know it's going in S tier. Like, come on. Come on! Who do you think I am? Bias aside, because of, obviously, what Tactics Ogre did for the channel, Tactics Ogre Reborn is the modern pinnacle of Matsuno turn-based strategy RPGs. It is refined to a point that is pretty undeniable in its quality. And yes, those of us who know it very well, you know, your coffee potatoes, myself, other members of the community who have deep dived on the mechanics far beyond anything I've had the opportunity to do, know that there's problems. Sure, there's some bugs, there's some things that don't make sense. Some people are going to argue that the cards that spawn are bad, or that the removal of spells are bad. Personally, those people are wrong, but they're entitled to their opinion. But overall, in terms of taking the formula that is FFT and Tactics Ogre and honing it down to the sharpest edge that you can make, Tactics Ogre Reborn is it, man. Like, I'd love to see what happens with something like Knight of Lotus if they were to remake that and hone that down. I haven't played it yet, so I can't speak to its mechanics versus Tactics Ogre, but it just goes to show that there's still so much blood to squeeze from these very old stones. It's so impressive to see. It speaks to the mechanical quality. It speaks to the narrative quality, the character writing, the music, the visuals. Like, how many of y'all had never seen anything to do with Tactics Ogre before, came into those initial streams of mine, and immediately got hooked? A lot of you. Quite a fair bit. And that's a game that, despite its mechanical changes over the years, has, from a design standpoint, remained relatively unchanged for decades. And that's extremely impressive, for sure. Channel making title. Honestly, it's how I found your channel. It's how a lot of people found my channel. That and Unicorn Overlord. And Engage, to a certain degree. But Tactics Ogre and Unicorn Overlord were the big ones, for sure. Absolutely. Tactics Ogre S tier easily. Probably the best story I've seen in any of these games. Both absolutely true statements. I adore the story of Final Fantasy Tactics. It speaks to me a little bit more. It's a little bit more personal. But the overall grand narrative of Tactics Ogre is unmatched. I would argue in all of gaming. Just period. It's nuts. Okay, Three Houses. Three Houses, I think, is going to wind up in A tier. I absolutely adore Three Houses. I know some people don't, but it's definitely one of the most popular games in all of Fire Emblem. The main thing that bogs it down a little bit for me is how the Edelgard storyline didn't feel quite properly fleshed out, even though I did really enjoy it. And graphically, the game definitely struggled from being the first Fire Emblem title on the Switch. Like, we can see the distinction. Engage, for all of its character design issues, just from a pure graphical design standpoint, looks way better. A graphical fidelity standpoint looks way better. So there's some issues with story. A lot of people are going to say that there's issues with gameplay. I'm not as hung up on that for Three Houses. I like the way Three Houses plays. But there's a couple of issues that do keep Three Houses out of S tier for me, alongside such juggernauts as this. That said, I adore these characters. I adore this storyline. I have played every storyline in Three Houses, and I've played Blue Lions multiple times. I love the world. I love the mechanics. I love everything about it. And I'm glad that it got so many people into the franchise because it's just that good. So while I don't think it personally breaks FFT tier, it's absolutely A tier, and I will brook no arguments in that regard. I put it B personally. Ooh, I mean, that's fair. I think, for people who had more of an issue with the story or the gameplay, that's totally fair. Definitely not for me, though. Definitely not for me. Like, Three Houses is a JRPG, but not as much as a strategy RPG. Well, and that's, again, if you start talking about, like, depth of mechanics and everything, then there's definitely some issues there. But what they pulled together for it works so well to me that even though it's not anywhere near as deep as so many other titles, it doesn't feel bad. Like, the whole that came together, even though it's not as deep as it could be, still feels really good to play. And that end result is what matters the most to me. Okay, moving on. This is definitely going to be a contentious one, as we've seen in my post that went up yesterday. Darkest Dungeon. Obviously, very different from FFT. Very different from Fire Emblem. Very different from a lot of other strategy RPGs out there. But to me, Darkest Dungeon has always been a blend of dungeon crawler and strategy RPG. As a matter of fact, I meant to do this before the stream and then I forgot. I want to check, because I'm pretty sure I've looked at this before. I think if you actually look at the tags for Darkest Dungeon 1 on Steam, I've not looked at it on Steam for 2, but I think in its tags it has, in some form or fashion, turn-based strategy. Yep. Turn-based combat, turn-based strategy. Yep. Absolutely. RPG, it's all there. It's all there. 2 is going to be a harder argument. I think it still works, but Darkest Dungeon 1, you got the party building. Even though they're randomly generated, because of the nature of the way the game is set up, you still get very much attached to your party members. It's turn-based combat. It's very strategic. There's permadeath. There's gear rewards, ways to build classes, meta management of your characters. I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying, the bones are there. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I browsed it while I was at the gym today. I believe Coffee Potato himself left a comment on that poll that was basically outlining the same thought process. So it's going to be harder to make the same arguments for Darkest Dungeon 2. But to me, Darkest Dungeon 1 is absolutely an example of a strategy RPG that was made a dungeon crawler. So I'm going to stick by that. This is my poll. Now, as far as where it's going to go, This one's going to be blasphemy. I know this one's going to be blasphemy to a lot of people. Come at me, bro. Darkest Dungeon is an S-tier game. It is so influential. It did so many different unique things so goddamn well, and I adore it so much. I've put so much time into it. I've spent so much time thinking about it. I've spent so much time modding it. I've done so many runs. It has caused me so much frustration and anger and anxiety and elation and joy and giddy happiness. Darkest Dungeon is an experience. And if you love any sort of tactical combat, any sort of strategy, any sort of RPG team building, especially if you like any sort of Lovecraftian, gothic, dark environments, I gotta do it. And I gotta recommend that you play it if you haven't already. Absolutely. I knew it. Let's go! Never played Darkest Dungeon, so can't speak on it. It's phenomenal if you're okay with playing a really punishing game, and if you're okay with managing things like the stress mechanic and the way that characters can freak out. It's definitely an adjustment. I've seen that mechanic, the stress mechanic, be the thing that turns people off the game, and I get it, because there's really, at least, especially prior to Darkest Dungeon coming out, I've never experienced anything like it. But it's not for everybody, for sure. But if it clicks with you, it clicks. Absolutely. The last spell. Okay. This one's going to be interesting. I mean, last spell is obviously definitely a turn-based strategy RPG. It is basically Tactics or Fire Emblem, but what if everything was a defense mission? The one thing that gets me about the last spell is it's always felt very samey. And I know with updates and added content, tweaks and modifications to things, that's been changed up a bit, but at the end of the day, every mission boils down to build the wall, build defenses, keep building up your characters so that they can kill as many zombies in a turn as possible, and just try to keep them from getting as many hits on you as possible. You'll hit boss fights, stuff like that. The meta progression is really good. I do really enjoy it from a gameplay experience, don't get me wrong. But I haven't finished it. I've always been more compelled to play other stuff. As much as I've had times where I'm absolutely obsessed with it, I've had issues with it sticking in the same way that a lot of these other games have. It is not a bad game by any means. Not even a middle-of-the-road game. It's very good. It's very, very good. I think it goes in B tier. And note, that's in the full context of me not having really experienced the full breadth of the game since it hit its 1.0 release and then dropped its major DLC. I am behind the times on that. I know that fully. But based off of all the time that I've spent with the game thus far, especially during early access and everything, that feels comfortable. That feels like a solid spot. I think I have nostalgia for Last Spell because that was one of the first games we got community characters for on the channel. Yeah. Yes, it is. God, and what a glorious time it was. Okay, Symphony of War, the Nephilim Saga. This is an easy A tier. Dude, I'd never expected to have an indie title that's so well blended. Fire Emblem, FFT, and Ogre Battle. Not Tactics Ogre, Ogre Battle. In such a compelling way. I know I've not played it on the channel. I did one video talking about it, the first ever episode of Turn-Based Strategy Saturday, or the Turn-Based Strategy Spotlight, which has now become defunct because it's just hard to keep up. But there's a reason that I've never played it on the channel, as I've talked about before. That reason is the day that it came out, I bought it. I was up at my parents' place. I was like, all right, I'll play this for a couple hours, see how it is, see if it's something I'm going to want to play on the channel. 10 hours later, the sun was rising, and I'd beaten half the game. Shit's real good. Shit's real good. Like, insanely good. Absolutely phenomenal. Symphony of War: The Nephilim Saga is a game that if you have a PC and you're at all interested in tactics, Fire Emblem, or Ogre Battle, you have to check it out. Being able to put together squads, again, like if you've played Unicorn Overlord, you need to check out Symphony of War. Being able to put together squads of all these different unique characters that have their own skills, their own weapon types, their own advantages and disadvantages, and figuring out how you're going to navigate those squads around a Fire Emblem FFT style map and achieve all your different objectives, seeing all the different ways that you can develop those characters, having a whole tech tree that's going to unlock different skills or even different whole promotions for those characters, having what is honestly some of the most interesting fantasy world building I've seen in a game in the last 10 years, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Symphony of War is phenomenal. Absolutely great. It has some issues. Some of the art, some of the animations are a little clunky. There's certain quality of life things that are a little that keeps it from being S tier for me. But the next game, if Dancing Dragon Studios has shown anything, it's that they can put out a banger. And much like with Dark Deity 2, I'm expecting some really great stuff from those guys. So, for now, Symphony of War is going to be A tier. It absolutely deserves to be up amongst some of the highest ranked stuff. It's phenomenal. I adore it. This list is too nice. Well, I'm not being harsh enough. Is that the issue here? Well, we have a lot of games to come across here, okay? All right. A lot of things to do. Speaking of which, it's Front Mission First Remake. Front Mission First Remake, I enjoyed, but it would get frustrating. It would absolutely get frustrating. Part of it is just older game design. Part of it is certain things that I kind of figured would be made more apparent in a modern remaster that weren't. Like the way you would unlock skills, or how generally useless melee is, or how goddamn hard it can be to just kill a single enemy mech if you haven't unlocked the ability to target specific body parts. The fact that there's certain terrain that certain types of legs just can't navigate properly. And you're not told that in any way. You're not told that it's coming up unless there's like a little bit of like pre-mission dialogue that mentions it, but there's nothing like in a mission objective that talks about it. So you just experiment with it for yourself. There's just certain things. RNG is a huge factor in a way that gets a little bit debilitating. The number of misses that you can get is extremely frustrating. And, you know, older game, story's pretty basic. I really do enjoy the character portraits, the art, the design of all the mechs. The story itself is compelling enough. Then when you get to the second story, and like that is weird because it becomes extremely punishingly difficult until you get like a couple of upgrades. There's just certain things, just not quite tweaked in a way that makes it really hum, even though I did still enjoy the experience. So it'll probably be our first C tier. I mean, I did go through both stories. I did enjoy my time, but I had to force myself a little bit. I'm excited to check out Front Mission Remake 2 and then 3 once that drops. I've heard that those are far better received than the first game, so this could really just be an issue with the first title in the series. They don't really know what they want to do with it yet. Happens all the time, would not be surprised. But compared to other stuff on this list, I think it's a solid C tier. Now Darkest Dungeon 2. Boy, I've gone on record being pretty critical of Darkest Dungeon 2, man. I think this is going to be our first couldn't finish. And it's frustrating. It really is. There's so much that I like about Darkest Dungeon 2. I love the art. Absolutely beautiful. All the animations are phenomenal. The development of the different heroes, very interesting. But I don't like the roguelike style. I don't like the road trip nature of it. All of the bosses are insanely frustrating to fight in a way that I never really felt with the bosses in DD1. It's just a frustrating experience to play, and it's lost so much of what makes the first game so compelling for me. So even though we've started multiple playthroughs in early access and then in full release, I've played it a fair bit on my own. I've done guides for it. I've had time to play it. And I've just preferred to do other stuff. So, yeah, I think it has to sit and couldn't finish. Poor Red Hook. Yeah, the fact that Red Hook got acquired, it ain't great. There's like a solid 50% of the fan base that is not super happy with Darkest Dungeon 2, and I mean, I fall into that same category. My buddy Jordan, who's played probably a solid 400 to 500 more hours of Darkest Dungeon 1 than I have, and I've played many hundreds of hours of Darkest Dungeon 1, he was way more optimistic about DD2. And I don't know if he's finished it either. Like, people who love it. And there's aspects I love about it, but man. So, FE3 Remake we have here. I think this is a pretty solid B. The DS Fire Emblems, the remakes of 1 and 3 are a little rough. Graphically, they're still not great. Funny enough, I might actually wind up rating Shadow Dragon higher because I like its replayability more. But Mystery of the Emblem, New Mystery of the Emblem, is really good. Like, mechanically, story-wise, it is structured way better than Shadow Dragon, absolutely. But there's just certain things about it, like the new cast of characters, the inclusion of like a pseudo support thing was kind of eh. It introduced avatar characters, which I'm not super high on at this point if it's not specifically Robin. It's fine. Like, it's a good Fire Emblem game. Absolutely. No doubt. But it's probably the one that I've had the least interest in going back to replay. Even though I think it's definitely mechanically a lot more solid than other ones on this list that are going to be ranked lower. So, okay. Sword of Convallaria, I think, is very solidly B tier as well. It has its issues, of course. The fact that it's tied to the gacha mode is definitely a little eh. But that said, I love the characters, I love the visuals, I love the mechanics. There's stuff that I definitely think is a little shallow mechanically, like some of the rewards that you get and the town management could definitely be a lot deeper, and I think it's not because of being tied to a gacha mode and being designed with mobile friendliness in mind. But even with that, the different classes, the different skills, the different mechanics that are at play are a ton of fun to play with. Like, I do really enjoy Sword of Convallaria. I think it is a very, very strong entry in the overall pantheon of turn-based strategy RPGs, but I don't think, given its nature, it reaches the same heights as some other things on this list. I do love it, though. Absolutely. Moving on to Disgaea 1. I've not finished Disgaea 1, but it's not one that I'm going to put in couldn't finish because I do want to go back to it. It's just always a game that I've just kind of picked at, like, over the holiday when I'm up at my parents' place, or, like, just when I have a little bit of downtime, and I haven't had a lot of that recently, but I do adore what it's doing. Like, it's got that old, like, early 2000s goofy anime vibe, but the art style is great, and, like, the whole demon world vibe of all the different, like, characters being evil demons but also having compassion, and you being this demon prince is just super fun. The printies and the different wild gameplay mechanics like geotiles and being able to stack up towers of characters that you can then throw around. Printies explode. Like, the endless scalability of the item world, just the concept of the item world is so much fun to just spend time in grinding and exploring. It's absolutely a very, very strong experience. I think it's very solidly B tier. There's certain things that definitely could use a lot more explanation and fleshing out, and from what I understand, they get that in future entries. But I want to see what else Disgaea has to offer, and it is a very fun experience on its own. It just has been superseded by a lot of other games that I could be playing. But I really want to see Disgaea 3, 4, and 5. I've heard great things about them. I've heard good stuff about 2 as well. I think it's a very strong franchise. I just need the time to really dig into it, for sure. Now, this is probably going to be a controversial one. FE6, Sealed Sword / Binding Blade. This is C tier. This is probably my least favorite Fire Emblem game of all time. And that's a shame because I love Roy. But as the first GBA title, it's got a lot of rough edges. A A lot of the maps, very uninspired, very bland-looking game in general. So many of the characters are completely useless. So many of the characters have zero likability or compelling features to them whatsoever. The story has so much potential, but it's so much just a kind of retread of FE3. Like, Zephiel is in so many ways just hardened. He's just not possessed. Yeah, like Canadian said, it's very bland. My least favorite FE2, lol. Yeah, exactly. Like, it is not a bad game. And I would rather replay... This is what's weird, right? Like, I'd rather replay Binding Blade over FE3 Remake because, like, the GBA formula is just so good. But from a mechanical, visual, story standpoint, it just doesn't hit as hard. It's weird. I know. But yeah, it's just... FE6 is just so weird in that regard, man. It's rough around the edges in ways that are hard to get past as a longtime Fire Emblem fan. I think C is a very appropriate place for it, for sure. Absolutely. Okay. Now, I know it's kind of cut off weird here, but Echoes. Echoes, I think, is a very strong A tier. I know, again, with map design stuff, people are likely to crucify me for that. But story of Echoes, very good. Visuals of Echoes, phenomenal. The gameplay animations, great. Mechanics, extremely strong. Dungeons, super cool to explore. Characters, very compelling. Dual narrative split, the way it's done on the map and everything, super cool. Soundtrack, god tier. Really the only thing dragging Echoes down is that it does suffer from old school Fire Emblem map design. And I don't mind that, because I prefer a game that lets its mechanics speak for itself rather than throwing gimmick maps at you constantly to keep things fresh and interesting, quote unquote. But, you know, you just get a lot of cavalry rush maps and stuff like that. There's more they could do in that older school formula than is done here. But all of the other aspects of the game are so strong that it has to be an A tier for me. Engage. This is a tough one, man, because I love Engage so much mechanically, but I also hate the way it looks so much, and I hate so many of the characters so much. It's got to go B tier. It's too mechanically strong to drop lower, even though just the designs and the characters and the writing are so horrendous in so many ways. But the actual graphical fidelity is so good. The mechanics are so strong. The callbacks to the rest of the franchise, the Engage mechanic are all so good. I can't put it anywhere else. It's a game of absolute highs and absolute lows, and it balances out to be a pretty middle-of-the-road experience. Like, even though I have so many negatives that I put against it, it's perfectly balanced by all the things that I love about it. Like, Engage is absolutely a game that I'll go back and play for the rest of my life. No doubt. I'm never going to be able to get past what I dislike about it. It won't keep me from playing it, but it will always bug me. And I don't think there's any other Fire Emblem game that I can say that about, which is really weird. FFT tier, you're in... No, you're just flat out wrong, sir. You are just incorrect. That is as incorrect of a statement as your opinions on Sekiro. How about that? Thracia 776. I think this is going to be another B tier. I like 776 a lot. It's just... I think it suffers narratively a little bit by being wedged between the... not just generations, but chapters of Genealogy of the Holy War. If it had more room to breathe narratively, I think it would be stronger. And while I love all the interesting things that it did from a game design standpoint, like with the stamina system and the capture mechanic and like all of your army needing to flee before Leaf escapes a map, otherwise they get captured, like all that type of stuff, the way they handled dismounting, like there's a ton of really cool stuff in Thracia, but it didn't get properly fleshed out. And until more recent titles where they've gone back to certain things like the capture mechanic and stuff like that to a degree in Fates, has never had the chance to get fleshed out. I think of the games that we're kind of waiting for a remake of at this point for Fire Emblem, even though I want to see Genealogy the most because Genealogy is just so good, I think Thracia deserves it the most. Because Thracia has so much going for it that if it just got tuned a little bit, tweaked just slightly, could achieve insane heights. But as it is, it's kind of like Engage in that way. Like, I love the characters and the story of 776 so much, even if they have their problems. I love the mechanics as they exist so much, but they have problems that I can't see past, so that drags it down a bit. All right, Shadow Dragon. Shadow Dragon, I have to put in A, man. I've spent so many hours replaying Shadow Dragon. Like, it's just Fire Emblem distilled to its core. If Shadow Dragon had been remade on the GBA, I think it'd be S tier. Just because it is the Fire Emblem. It is the original. All of your major story beats come from here, and so they deserve to stand on their own. They're not rote. They're not overplayed. They're just Fire Emblem. This is where you get Marth. This is where you get the Falchion. This is where you get the basis of all the classes, the way that maps work, your permadeath, all the different character archetypes. This is where it comes from. And to this day, it still stands strong. Like I said, I've replayed this game a ton. The maps just flow. The story doesn't get in the way. The different classes all feel like they have a good niche that they fit in. And then you can reclass in this version as well and come up with all sorts of crazy different character builds. Even though you don't have like classes and things, just manipulating growths and stats and like weapon tiers, you can still do so much with it. The fact that you actually have the ability to get different unique characters if you let your characters die. It leans into the permadeath aspect of Fire Emblem in a way that I wish other games in the series would. There's a lot going on here, and I do really think that it deserves to be an A tier. To me, not exclusively, but a big part of how highly I rate a game is how much I want to replay it. So despite its faults, being ugly as sin, having a fairly basic storyline with fairly basic characters that, again, I think still deserve to be ranked on their own because they're the OG, the sheer replay value of this game puts it pretty high for me. Shadow Dragon take is based. Hey, thank you. Thank you. Now, Together in Battle. This is a much more recent one, and if Sinister Design is here, then this is his baby right here. Together in Battle is a game that I did not expect to suck me in the way that it did, man. I spent so much time in Japan playing this game on the Steam Deck, and I've spent so much time since we got back playing it too. It's in early access, so I can't fault it too much. I've run into plenty of issues with it, things, bugs and whatnot that I've forwarded to Sinister Design. But the overall core that is here is so compelling. Yeah, there's going to be people that don't like the art style. There's going to be people that don't like this and that. Totally get it. But the mechanical strength of this game is so good. All the different mage classes, all the different kind of fiddly ways that you can manipulate the battlefield. The fact that you have an engineer class to put down traps and walls and build bridges. The fact that you have a kineticist mage that's basically just a Jedi, that their whole primary function is pushing and pulling people at range to get them away from your guys or pull them into rivers or pits so that they start drowning or so that they die outright. Push them into fires or just knock them against other dudes and have them take damage. The fact that you have like fun tweaks to the Fire Emblem and FFT formulas. Like you have your Cavaliers, long range. They get to use their movement if they have any left over after they finish their attack. They use lances. Except they're riding giant mantises, and they have different special abilities that let them like charge a certain distance and knock things back and stun them. Like there's so many cool mechanical things going on with Together in Battle. I have to put it in A tier. And really, the only reason I'm not putting it in S tier right now is because there have been a ton of different like little fiddly early access bugs or just balance problems that I've run into that have made for a frustrating experience at times. But this is one of the games that recently I've been like, I want to get off of work or get home from the gym or finish working on what I'm working on for the channel so that I can play more Together in Battle. Or like when we were in Japan, like, you know, had all these great experiences, saw all these cool things. But I'm kind of excited for the fact that we have a 3-hour Shinkansen ride tomorrow, just so I can chill on the train and play Together in Battle on my Steam Deck. Like, it is so cool, man. I can only hope that once early access is done and like different bugs and tweaks have been hammered out and changed and everything, that this becomes an all-timer and that I can convince a bunch of people to play it. Because goddamn, if you just love mechanical complexity and well thought out, well put together classes and battlefield interaction and management of a party, this one's for you, man. And the fact that it's got a bunch of like randomness, sort of roguelike nature to it, even though it's a full-fledged campaign, but each new campaign is going to run differently with different events, different types of characters, all that type of stuff, different character interactions, because each character is unique in their own right. Like, there's so much replayability here. It's so sick. Sorry, I heard giant mantis mounts based on as hell on that alone. Yeah, dude, seriously. Like, Cavaliers are basically just Fire Emblem Cavaliers, functionally, but you're riding a giant mantis. It's so cool. Absolutely adore Together in Battle. Phenomenal. Fire Emblem Fates is A tier. Actually, no, Fire Emblem Fates is S tier. Fuck you. Absolutely. Based story, based characters, based gameplay, great classes. Love the differences between Hoshido and Nor. No notes. It's one of my favorite Fire Emblems of all time. Come at me. I will fight all of you. I will be Neo in the Matrix, dodging all of your faux accusations of being biased or stories being bad. No, I don't care. Fates is one of my favorite Fire Emblems of all time. I think it's great. It's got an easier, more simple storyline and gameplay in Hoshido for those who want that. Great mechanical depth, complexity, challenge, and compelling characters if you play Nor. And I'm going to say it. A really interesting melding of the two if you go into Revelations. And it's a whole lot of content to be able to play through. My Castle is still the best iteration of any sort of base or like home territory that you can go back to that they've done in the series thus far. The character designs are absolutely some of the best in the series. Some of the best in strategy games in general. Done. S tier. That's it. You can't even fight me. We're just going to move on. Done. P5 Tactica. Man, this one's tough. P5 Tactica is tough, man. I'm not sure if it goes in couldn't finish or D. I had fun playing it while I played it. But once I hit the point where I wasn't allowed to show any more of it because of Atlas's weird embargo on showing past a certain point, I felt no compulsion to go further. I think I could finish it. I could. Because I do enjoy playing it to a degree. It's way too simple. It's way too formulaic. But there's just so much more that I feel like they could have done with it that they just didn't. And then just like, God, the Morgana voice lines. And like so much of the game is just, how can I set up my triangle attack? And that's it. Yeah. I think it's got to go to D. I just realized something. I don't have Into the Breach on here. I don't have Into the Breach on here. Hold on. I got to add Into the Breach to this really quick. Hold on. Hold the phone. We're going to put up the, where is it? We're going to put up the starting soon really quick because I have to go and download, or not even download, just save an image of Into the Breach. This is of vital importance because Into the Breach is actually a title that I really enjoy, and it is absolutely something that should be in this tier of games. Hold on. The reason I thought about it is because P5 Tactica reminds me of Into the Breach in a lot of ways. but without any of the substance that makes Into the Breach really hum. So let me just do this really quick. We're going to add an additional image. God, I hope this doesn't reset the whole thing. If this resets the whole thing, I'm going to be very upset. There we go. Cool. There it is. Into the Breach is here. Let me go ahead and take the going live off the screen. Boom. There we go. Into the Breach right here. We'll talk about that, I guess, at the end. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think P5 Tactica goes in D. It just didn't impress in the way that I expected it to. I'll probably go back and finish it at some point, but I've got no major compulsion to right now. Unicorn Overlord is S tier. I mean, what do you expect? Really? Like, not just because it did so much for the channel, but just, oh my god. You want to talk about the opposite spectrum of Atlas games here? Obviously, Vanillaware is the dev here, but still, like, music, visuals, story's pretty good. Not as good as everything else. Character designs, strategic design, classes, progression, world map, map exploration. It is just like... It's one of my favorite games of all time. Y'all already know. Like, I don't even need to go into it that much. If you're watching this, you've probably seen my Unicorn Overlord coverage. Like, it's just a top-tier game. It's probably going to be my game of the year. And without really much competition. Like, Space Marine 2 is probably going to get second closest. And, I mean, that's a good game, too. Don't get me wrong. But, like, Unicorn Overlord is just a game that fired on every single cylinder for all of my interests. No notes. It's just a perfect game. All around. Done. Like, I can't even, there's nothing more I can talk about. It's just great. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Okay, Pokemon Conquest. I think C is for Conquest. This is an interesting one. Because Pokemon Conquest, I do really like. I do really, really like. The issue is it's too simple. If you didn't know, Pokemon Conquest is a blending of, like, FFT and Nobunaga's Ambition, but with a Pokemon skin. And it's really cool. Like, the concept is really cool. All of the designs are really fun. And the moment-to-moment gameplay is really engaging. The problem is that there's not much depth. Each Pokemon has one attack. They will only ever have one attack. They have that attack and an item. All of your different, like, elemental advantages and disadvantages are there. But until a Pokemon evolves, it will only ever have that one attack. Once it evolves, it will only have the one attack of its evolved form. And that's it. The way the campaign progresses is interesting enough. It is fun. You go through, you conquer different nations, you actually build up each of those individual nations. They each have their own different terrain pieces, like a bank or different, like, maps that you can find different Pokemon on. You can actually capture different Pokemon with different warlords. And a lot of the fun of the game comes from building up your army of warlords. You can have 6 at a time in any given area, and you can attack any given area with 6 at a time. And each of those warlords has different Pokemon that they have better and better affinity with. You get your Pokemon to evolve by getting them to a certain affinity, meaning only certain warlords are going to be able to get certain Pokemon to evolve. So a lot of the fun of the game is finding what warlords go with what Pokemon, and then figuring out how to recruit the named warlords so you can max out your teams, right? The issue is that you finish the main story. It's fairly quick, but then you're like, I only got to recruit some of the warlords, and there was a relatively minimal amount of Pokemon that I was able to recruit. And then even though you find Arceus and at the end and you fight Nobunaga, who has shiny Rayquaza, you don't actually get to get them. And then it's done. And then you find out that the game is going to throw like 30 different campaigns at you, all with different starting warlords through different, basically filler storylines that will explore smaller or bigger chunks of the map with different objectives. And while that's interesting and it allows you to continue to develop your roster of warlords over time, because any progress that you make with different warlords and Pokemon carries over to future campaigns, it's still just the same maps over and over. It's the same objectives over and over. And once you get the perfect Pokemon with the perfect warlord, they're strong, but there's no more progression to be had there. So you wind up running to this point where you get about halfway through the campaigns, and it's like, I've got a perfect collection of characters that can just breeze through everything. And at this point, I'm just spending time grinding to get the perfect Pokemon with the different warlords and get them evolved before I finish a mission. Because the missions are the campaigns are pretty easy to clear, just for the sake of that progression. So I've never actually finished the game. I intend to at some point. It's not a matter of not being able to finish it. But I go back and play it for like a few weeks once every year or two. And I've just been slowly picking away at it over time. There's a lot of fun stuff there, but it runs its course and it outstays its welcome very quickly. And it takes a long time for me to get back to the point where I want to play it again. So, yeah, I think C tier is perfectly appropriate for Conquest. It is fun, and I do recommend checking it out if you're at all interested. But to get everything done is an insane slog, and there's just too much sameness to the game. Chimera Squad. XCOM Chimera Squad. This is another, do I put it in D or couldn't finish? I think it goes couldn't finish. I don't have as much of a mechanical problem with Chimera Squad. In fact, I like a lot of what it does mechanically. But it again feels very narrow and restrictive. The fact that in Chimera Squad, you are essentially running what is a glorified SWAT team. Yet as you proceed through the game, you wind up running into missions that are as deep and difficult, if not even deeper and more difficult than XCOM 2 missions. But you still are limited to a squad of 4 guys with a much more limited roster of abilities and gear available to them. Really hurts. Chimera Squad is very obviously a game that was made by a secondary team as a test bed for mechanics that they want to eventually include in XCOM 3. And it has a level of shallowness to it that makes it hard to get through. At the start and at its base, I think it's awesome. Having a bunch of alien squad members, having them have unique abilities that are based on the abilities, if not outright, are the abilities of those aliens in XCOM 2. Having the chatter between squad mates, that's a ton of fun. Having the sort of resource management that it goes into, like running a small precinct of police as opposed to having a whole big like resistance force on Earth. There's a lot going for it there. I love the breach mechanics. I love the more condensed maps. I enjoy all of that type of stuff. But you hit a certain midway point where the mechanics of that running a small police precinct run into, we don't know how to make battles bigger and better and more intense than just making them XCOM 2 battles without the mechanics that are available to the player feeling like they match that. And I always hit a stalling point with the game as a result. So that's why I couldn't finish it. I adore playing it in the early stages, but then it gets to a point where it feels like the cohesion of the game just kind of falls apart, and it's a bit of a shame. We're going to try to move through these rest of these entries pretty quick because my voice is really starting to hurt. So, Fire Emblem Awakening is absolutely an A tier game. I would be tempted to put it in S tier, but it will always rub me the wrong way that hard mode has enemy turn ambush reinforcements, and it always keeps me from playing the game on hard when that's normally my preferred way to play a Fire Emblem game. But those reinforcements are just so annoying and are so apt at ending a mission 75% of the way through it and making you restart it that alone drags it down for me. Otherwise, I love the characters, I love the world, I love all the different interesting classes, all of the progression of skills and reclassing and essentially endless level ability of it. Having the children mechanic and having it be executed in a pretty fun way was a blast. The references to all the older games, being set in the timeline of Marth and Co, but thousands of years in the future, it's just so cool. All the voice work is great. All of the designs are great. The cutscenes are phenomenal. I just love everything about Awakening, except for the fact that such a core part of the gameplay experience for a Fire Emblem game is so unnecessarily annoying. And it's too important for me to be able to rank it as S, unfortunately. Now, Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones. This is a tough one. I mean, S is for Sacred Stones, obviously. But I'm really trying to keep my own bias from overwhelming me here. And in much the same way that I have to take points off of Awakening for... Oh, no. This is... God, I was looking here. Here, we'll just switch this since we were already talking about Sacred Stones at this point. Go? Hello? Thank you. We'll talk about 7 in a second. But much as I have to criticize Awakening for hard mode being bullshit because of ambush reinforcements, I think I have to criticize Sacred Stones for hard mode just not quite meeting the mark. Hard mode Sacred Stones is so much easier than hard mode of pretty much any other Fire Emblem game, and it's very disappointing. Like, it was tough when I was a kid, and Sacred Stones was the only game in the series that I'd played. But that's not the case anymore. I know what hard mode can be, and Sacred Stones doesn't quite hit that mark. Beyond that, again, I adore it. It's by far the best GBA game in the series. It's one of the stronger games in the series in general. It's got incredible artwork, incredible actual, like, color palette for the GBA is just insane. You've got the 2 branching character stories. You've got the fact that you have branching promotion paths, the reintroduction of skills for the first time in a long time. There's a ton to love. The creature campaign, 2 different dungeons to explore. There's so much that's packed into a GBA title. I can't put it any lower than A, and I have no desire to. I can't put it in S because of the fact that hard mode is just a little disappointing. But Sacred Stones is obviously going to have a massive place in my heart. Now, FE7, I think, is also a pretty easy A tier. A lot of people would say it deserves to be an S, but there's certain things that I'm just, like, compared to Sacred Stones, it's missing. Its color palette isn't as good. We're putting it in A, but its color palette isn't as good. It doesn't have branching promotions. There's no skills except for Assassinate. The story is compelling. It absolutely is. The characters, not as much, unfortunately. It's got an armored axe lord, which I love with Hector, but it doesn't have as much impact for me personally as Sacred Stones does. It's a little bit more rote Fire Emblem compared to Sacred Stones and, like, Leon's story and everything. It just doesn't hit quite the same. It's still a phenomenal game, but of the ones that I'm likely to go back and replay and feel attached to, Sacred Stones definitely hits harder. And if it wasn't for the difficulty stuff with Sacred Stones, I'd put it higher. I do love Hector hard mode and the difficulty that that brings to the table with FE7. It makes for a very tight experience, but I'm just not as attached to the characters of the story or the world. Little bland like FE6, but not too much. It's definitely more compelling than FE6, and I do like the way it sets up FE6, so it's got that going for it. XCOM 2 War of the Chosen is S tier. XCOM 2 War of the Chosen is fucking phenomenal. Absolutely. Like, dude, they added so much to the game when they technically finished it with War of the Chosen. There's so much you can do. There's so much dynamic, interesting stuff going on with the campaign. It's so tough. The bosses are so compelling with the Chosen and everything. The storyline is so much fun. It is a beautiful looking game. XCOM 2 War of the Chosen is one of the last proper expansions we got for a game. Not DLC, expansion. It is phenomenal. There's really not too much I can say about it. It's just the definitive XCOM experience. If you're a strategy player and you haven't played XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, you need to. It just feels so good to play, man. Every single mission is heart-pounding. There's so much mod capabilities. There's so many cool characters with just, like, all the different special classes, like with the Templars and the Skirmishers and the Reapers. Not Reavers, Reapers, right? Like, and everything that they can do on top of all the different classes that you have available, like your Heavies and your Rangers and your Snipers, and just, dude, it's so much fun. XCOM 2 is great. I've been itching to do another campaign for years, and when I do, we'll definitely be doing it on the channel. So, yeah, definitely an S-tier game and an exemplar of its particular subgenre of strategy games. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, I'd say I'd say it's A tier. I definitely think it's A tier. The main thing keeping it from being S to me is it's definitely aged pretty poorly graphically. Cutscenes don't look great. Character models don't look great. The portraits are good, definitely. But the whole rest of the game is pretty rough looking. It is extremely replayable. It's one of the more replayable games in the series, I would say. But, yeah, I can't put it in S tier. The graphics are just rough. It is definitely a very compelling story, though. I love Ike. I love the story of him and the Black Knight. Having a lord who's not a lord is so nice. And then I do love the way that it sets up Radiant Dawn as well. Absolutely phenomenal from that standpoint. As a duology, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, one of the best experiences in the Fire Emblem series. I always have to play them back to back. If you're not doing that, I think you're doing it wrong, for sure. A-tier experience, for sure. Not sure where I'm going to put Radiant Dawn yet. That's going to be interesting. Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark, I think, is a very solid B tier. I've not finished it. I played it in early access and just haven't had the time to go back to it. The art style in Fell Seal can definitely be rough. The character portraits can be rough. But I think, much like how not everyone's going to gel with the art style together in battle, mechanically, Fell Seal has a ton going for it. I really enjoy what you can start to do with characters in Fell Seal, a little bit that I saw, and that makes me rate it pretty high. But the art style, and then the fact that from what I've seen of it, the story of Fell Seal is literally just tactics. Like, it's pretty much just tactics in a more modern setting, like a steampunky type of setting, is pretty... I would like so much more from it, man. I think it makes for a very solid B-tier experience, though. And I do really want to go back and play the whole rest of it now that it's out of early access and it has an expansion and all that type of stuff. So, not a bad game by any means, but it's got its downsides. Tactics Advance, I think... I hate to say it, but I think I got to put Tactics Advance in C tier. And I say that even though I love the game. I love this game, but it definitely has problems. Notably, its story is not one. I love the story of Tactics Advance. The whole idea of a child having an artifact thrown into their hands that allows them to create their ideal fantasy world where they can escape from all the problems of real life and all of the problems that causes for people along the way, and how you need to accept what life is and the realities of it, so that way you can make the most of it. Like, you can't just run away from things, is such a compelling story, especially because it's all kids. It's a rough lesson, especially for children, but it's so good, and the characters are so compelling. I do love it for having tactics-style gameplay. My major issues come from the fact that mechanically it definitely has aged, graphically it has definitely aged, and there's so many times that you can run into a frustrating lack of forward momentum from a mechanical standpoint. Just the fact that, like, you can run out of weapons to learn skills from for a class and just have to wait until you find other ones. You haven't mastered the class. You just got to wait until the game decides that you're allowed to learn more skills. That's rough. That's annoying. The fact that the, the Morpher, right, class is basically completely useless as an extension of Beastmaster is sad. There's a lot of issues with the law system. Even though I love the law system, you get to a point where it's just like, well, I just have a Nullify All Laws card, and I've got a stack of them, so I'm just going to remove this mechanic from the game after a certain point. Is like, the fact that evasion rates can be such a problem if you're trying to attack from the front or the sides gets annoying. There's just issues with it. And hell, the fact that you can lock yourself out from being able to complete all 300 missions because the inventory is so limited, and as you're trying to figure out how to manage it and have all the requisite items on hand that you need for a bunch of different things, that you can accidentally throw away an item that you didn't know you needed to be able to unlock the final mission in the game, and there's no way to get it back, and it leaves you as an 8-year-old child desperately sobbing, calling the Nintendo hotline, finding out if they can help you in any way get it back, and then the very nice lady on the other end of the hotline sounds so sad that she can't, and she recommends that you restart the game, but you don't want to because you've completed everything else in the game, and it took like 200 hours to do, which as a child is a lot of time. Leaves a little bit of a bitter taste on the tongue. So I think C tier is where Tactics Advance is going to sit. I still love the game, and I want to play it on the channel, but it's got problems. A2, Grimoire of the Rift, fixes a lot of those problems, and I really enjoy it. It still has its issues, but I think it goes solidly in B tier. A2 doesn't have nearly as compelling of a story or characters as Tactics Advance does, and it's kind of awkward since it's connected more to 12 rather than continuing some of the storylines and themes of Advance, but then still tries to tie back to them. It's kind of weird. But I love the ways that A2 advanced the Tactics Advance series, even though there's only 2 of them. Graphically, mechanically, and overall made a deeper, more rich experience. The problem, as I said, is the narrative is nowhere near as compelling, and also you still run into issues with progression that can be very annoying. And that issue with progression is the bazaar, wherein you bring items to the bazaar and you offer them up and see what gear and weapons you unlock as a result. And there's so many, and some of the resources are so limited, and it's so hard to know without just saving and reloading, trying different combinations if you're not pulling up like a guide on the internet, right? How to get the things that you want for the classes and characters that you want to use. It can take so long to progress in a class because you're just waiting desperately to unlock a basic ass weapon that statistically sucks at the point in the story that you're in, but you just haven't gotten the right drop of a random type of freaking ore to be able to unlock that weapon in the bazaar. And then you still have to buy the damn thing. Like, it leads to such weird progression problems sometimes if you're not just outright using a guide. And even if you are, sometimes you still just gotta wait for the materials to drop. So it's like, in a game that has a great sandbox with a ton of great classes, 2 new races that have classes of their own, things that have been tweaked to make it more useful and more efficient and more compelling to try out. It's such a fun sandbox to exist in with so many unnecessary breaks and checks and limiters on you that can make it that, like, your favorite class is just hamstrung for hours without you being able to do anything about it. That said, I love the world, like the more open world map. I do really enjoy the more involved mission structure, the more varied objectives, the bosses, the actual like big boss creatures. A2 does a ton right. There's just certain things that hold it back in a way that are incredibly frustrating. Baby Tom lore. What item was it? It was the rat tail. I will always remember. I've talked about this on stream before, I think, but yeah, the rat tail that you need to have on hand to go on the mission where you unlock Judge Sid, and it's the last mission in the game, and you can't do it, and you can't get another rat tail, and they let you throw it away if you are trying to make space in your inventory and it's been sitting there the entire time and you had no idea. FFTA sounds like Aedis Eclipse here after that story. No, it's way too strong of a game for that. Definitely. A2 is very grindy, but I still love it. Yeah, definitely. Guild Saga Vanished Worlds is obviously a very fresh one. I've not had the chance to spend much time with it. And as such, I can't rank it too highly just because I don't know that much about it. But just off of potential alone, I think it goes in B tier. I love the music. I love the blend of like Final Fantasy Tactics and Divinity Original Sin / Baldur's Gate combat and inventory management. I love all the different elemental interactions, magical and physical armor. The world and its story seems like it could be super good. The main things holding it back, I think, are the potential that the story could wind up falling off, but there's really just kind of a potential thing, so I can't knock it too much. And then the art style can be very divisive, like the character portraits versus the world sprites and everything. I really like it. It's got a ton of potential, but I don't think I can rank it much higher than B tier in good faith, but I do think it definitely deserves a look, and I'm definitely going to be playing more of it, either on or off the channel as soon as I have the opportunity to, because I do really enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay and the world and the music and everything else of Guild Saga, but I don't have that much I can say about it right now. Joan of Arc, I think, also goes in B tier. It has some limitations, but I've loved what I've played of it thus far. I need to dive in and play more of it, but I love the transformations. I love some of the different character types that we've had. There's just certain things, like the slottable runes, seem like they probably wind up getting a little limited, and then it feels like very quickly characters that don't have transformations are going to fall off, and I don't like that in games like this where you get a wide array of characters that have a lot of different skills and different capabilities. Having the characters that have just the blatant plot transformations, it can be okay if your generic characters or your characters that don't have them can also perform. But based on what we were getting to thus far, fairly early in Joan of Arc, it very quickly felt like my characters with transformations were becoming the way to play, with a couple minor exceptions. So, I don't know. I need to get back in and play more of it, but it is definitely a compelling experience. I think B tier is a decent place for it. Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, specifically differentiated from Reborn, is C tier. And I know that might be surprising for people, but I have issues. I have issues with Let Us Cling Together in how goddamn grindy it is, how incredibly annoying and frustrating the forging system is, and just how slow it is, man. There is absolutely no reason that a character with a cool class that you get for the first time should need to be ground up from level 1, because it's their class that dictates their level, and you have had no chance to use that class up to that point. There is no reason that there should be a failure rate on forging any weapon or armor when those weapons and armor are so intrinsic to the strength and capabilities of your characters. There is no reason why you should be compelled to grind the same battles over and over for literal hours just to be able to level up a weapon proficiency, to be able to use a finisher, or just be able to deal decent damage. And that's to say nothing of the fact that you have equivalent skills for every type of enemy in the game and every or almost every other action in the game. I do really enjoy Let Us Cling Together. I really do. But I never finished it because it just got too frustrating in too many different ways. And it was such a shame. Because obviously, story-wise, character-wise, classes, like all that type of stuff, it's the same thing as in Reborn. And they're all phenomenal in Reborn. But some of the mechanical decisions in Let Us Cling Together just bogged it down too much. And I was playing it first in high school when I had all the time in the world, and then during the pandemic when I had all the time in the world. And both times, I never finished it. So, yeah, I know this is going to be a hot button one, I'm sure. But Reborn is the clearly superior product. You fix all of the issues that I had with Let Us Cling Together, and you're able to enjoy all the other mechanical depth and incredible stories and visuals and music and everything else without being bogged down in some of the most tedious grind I've ever experienced in a game. Whew. That one's going to be interesting. Moving on, Warhammer 40k Chaosgate Daemonhunters, D tier. And it's such a shame. For those of you who don't know what it is, 40k Chaosgate Daemonhunters is 40k XCOM. And if that sounds like the goddamn coolest thing on earth, it is, except for what the fuck some of the mechanical decisions in this game, man. I've tried to play it so many times, and I enjoy it while I do, but you kind of run into the Chimera squad issue. Maybe it should be in couldn't finish, but I think it's really more just a matter of mechanical issues, as opposed to just not liking the design. Where you have the Grey Knights, right? And the Grey Knights are like the super specialist, most badass space marines around. They're all psychers. They're all basically wizards. They're all built from the ground up to slay demons and be like near immune to the powers of the warp. And like they're spec ops. They can handle anything. And then with the way the mechanics of Daemonhunters or Chaosgate is, your super badass Grey Knight can get shot to death by 2 Chaos Cultists. Well, that's just lame, isn't it? Also, if you use too many of your really sick psychic powers that you're supposed to be able to use to blow up demons, it's just going to make more of them spawn. Okay. And there's just a limitation here. Like, it is a game that clearly had a budget that prevented it from doing as much as it could. Like, there's such a limit on the variety of enemies that you could be fighting. Like, you're fighting Chaos Space Marines, Plague Marines, the Death Guard specifically. And they're just so limited in their design. It is a game that was created in an era prior to Warhammer 40k having the huge renaissance that it's having currently, leading to stuff like Space Marine 2 or Rogue Trader. And I want to see a new version of this with a modern interest in 40k and a modern budget. Because I do think it could be great. If it actually was built to anywhere near the standard of XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, this would be one of my favorite games of all time, period. But it just has a divorce between story, lore, power levels, and what you should be capable of and what you should be fighting, and then what you're actually given, that makes it frustrating to play from a mechanical standpoint and annoying from a lover of the lore and the world standpoint. So, it's just too frustrating to play sometimes, man. All right, we're down to the last few here. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn also goes in A tier. I love Radiant Dawn. A lot of people would probably rate it lower. But the fact that you have 4 distinct chapters with all these different angles of storyline is so sick. I love the graphics and the evolution of combat mechanics and graphical fidelity from Path of Radiance. Seeing all these new characters and how they fit into the world. Having tier 3 promotions is super cool. Lagoos feel way better to use. There's so many interesting different types of maps. The story feels like it's got such insane stakes for a Fire Emblem game. And the whole last dungeon that you go through, culminating in what is, I think, a really cool final boss at the end, absolutely makes Radiant Dawn awesome. It does have some issues with some characters just being absolutely garbage tier unless you dump everything into trying to use them, and it can cause limitations on certain maps that can be frustrating to work around. But all told, especially with the fact that you can carry stuff over from Path of Radiance, which is always a kind of meta mechanic that I adore in games, Radiant Dawn is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite games in the series, and again, much like Path of Radiance, I need to play both of them on the channel. It's going to be an absolute blast. I'm almost tempted to put Radiant Dawn in S tier, but I think it just has a couple of issues that make it not quite hit that bar. Phoenix Point. Phoenix Point, I think, goes in C tier. Phoenix Point is kind of like Chaosgate, where it has all the trappings that I love about XCOM, and in a lot of ways has stuff that I love way more than XCOM, like the Lovecraftian kind of seafaring crab monster design, the ability to free aim your shots, the base maintenance stuff all over the world, traveling all over the world to manage different havens, all the different interactions of the different factions and their world philosophies is so cool. But then near the end of the game, you just get so bogged down in trying to keep everything going that it's hard to get forward momentum on missions, and you'll run into missions sometimes that are just so overloaded with nasty enemies that you just find yourself saving and reloading over and over to try and find the one optimal outcome that you can get through to complete the mission without your entire squad getting crippled and essentially ruining the run. it slows things down immensely when the overall pace of the game in the first 2/3 is so good. I love this world. I would love to see a Phoenix Point 2 that refines things really well. But yeah, that last third of the game just gets too bogged down, man, for me to put it any higher. And it's a shame, because I really love so much about Phoenix Point, even more than XCOM 2. Pit People, gonna go and couldn't finish. Pit People is weird because it's got that like irreverent humor going on, which isn't normally my thing. But I played the whole thing that we played anyway, co-op with my buddy Eric, and that's just some of the most insane laughter I've had from a co-op experience ever. It's just so like, it's that Newgrounds humor, right? Like kind of edgy, just kind of ridiculous and gross and silly, but so funny at the same time. And the nature of just like piling into a truck with your like weird band of mutants and going around and fighting stuff that you're told to, while like a weird giant space bear in the sky like tells you to do things and like is the narrator and making you do things that's just like stupid because they think it's funny. Like it is a blast. But the problem is that both Eric and I are very mechanics focused people when it comes to strategy games. And you hit a certain point with Pit People where it's just like, you can't even tell why you're winning or losing anymore. And it's just like, I've got my big dude and we're just going to keep throwing him at stuff. And like, he'll just keep killing things till suddenly he dies. And we're not really sure why. Like, And because we love mechanics and strategy so much, once the humor stopped carrying the game, there wasn't a mechanical core to keep it compelling for us, so we wound up dropping it. I've thought about going back to it over the years, so has he, but whenever we've brought it up to the other, usually like when he brings it up, I'm like, or when I bring it up, he's like, and then we just stopped worrying about it, and it's probably going to just sit there forever unfinished. So, a little bit of a shame, but if you are looking for a relatively fun co-op strategy light experience with a buddy, it's not a bad one to pick up, for sure. Triangle Strategy. Triangle Strategy is S tier. And I know Coffee Potato will have words with me for this, but Triangle Strategy marries strategic and mechanical complexity with world building and characters that know the history that they're built off of and pay strong homage to it, while also being their own thing and letting the player actually have a hand in the story and actually make meaningful choices to see where you're going to wind up and what's going to happen to characters, that I love. I adore everything about it. I really can't think of a fault with it, honestly. Like, it's so well crafted. If I had to come up with one fault, it's really just how swingy hard mode can be at times, as you guys saw during my playthrough. Like, I'm not going to begrudge the game for being super difficult when I'm trying to, like, get the golden route on my first run through and, like, find the perfect path through things and not use the firebomb traps and, like, be able to beat things in ways that you're not supposed to be able to beat them. That's on me. That's fine. But then, on the flip side, when you run into a Thunder Mage that can chunk 3/4 of your tankiest character's health with one spell, meanwhile your melee character is hitting said mage for like 1/4 of their health with a strong melee attack, and they're a mage and they're squishy, it gets like, holy shit sometimes. Like, you definitely get a disparity of stats sometimes on hard mode that can be very annoying to circumnavigate. But that's not always the case. And usually when you do run into that situation, the game seems to kind of know that, like, hey, we're really challenging you to figure out how to get around this. You have the tools, figure out how to use it. And I was able to always figure out how to use what I had available to get around a situation. It could just be really nasty at times. So I respect that. It just felt slightly overtuned at times. But nowhere near enough to knock it down out of S tier for me. I will always go back to this game. I would love to see either a sequel or another game built like in the same engine, the same type of mechanics, but maybe telling a different story in a different world, whatever. Like an Octopath 2 type of thing, that type of deal. I would love it. I'd be like frothing at the mouth for it, really. If that ever gets announced, you know we'll be covering that like crazy on this channel, for sure. Tri-Strat is phenomenal, absolutely. And I'm glad to see people in chat agreeing with me. Triangle #1 best strategy RPG ever made. Like my dream game come to life. It was insane. Hell yeah. I hear that, man. I could not believe what I was seeing when they first announced it. And then when I got to play the demo, and it was like 3 hours long, and every mechanic made my jaw approach the floor a little bit more, drop a little bit lower. It was nuts. Absolutely phenomenal. Battle for Wesnoth. This is one that most of you guys probably have not heard of before. Boy, again, co-op hilarity and shenanigans have ensued a lot with this game, and I really enjoy it, but it's also one of those games that gets so friggin' frustrating. So Battle for Wesnoth is a free, like, community-driven game where all the assets are open source, and people can just kind of build whatever they want for it, and there's a whole online repository of different campaigns, classes, races, scenarios, etc. that you can download. It is a hex-based game rather than a square-based game. And the whole idea is that you have different areas of a 2D map that you're on. And you have a character that starts in the center of your little castle. And then every turn, almost in like an Advance Wars kind of way, which I didn't put on here because it's not an RPG. Battle for Wesnoth is more RPG, and I'll explain why. But if you're wondering where Advance Wars was, that's more of a strict tactics strategy game without the RPG. But Battle for Wesnoth allows you to each turn use gold to build different units for your chosen faction or race in those sections, and then you send them out to like capture properties and like explore the fog of war and fight enemies and stuff. It's really cool. It's a lot of really fun factions. There's all these different official and fan-made campaigns that have good storylines, a lot of interesting different maps. Music is really good. It's one of those games where it's fun to just sit and get sucked into it and play through a simple turn-based strategy experience. The problem comes from the fact that it is a game that relies very heavily on layered hit rates. And this is something that I'm now able to relate to things like Warhammer 40k, playing the tabletop. It's so friggin' hard to get a shot through in 40k. Because basically it's like, okay, I declare an attack with a squad on a squad. So I have all of my attacks. You're like, oh yeah, I've got like 20 shots. I'm going to destroy you. First you have to roll to hit. Then, of all of those hits, you have to roll to wound. So like, yeah, okay, your shot didn't go wide, you hit them. But does your shot penetrate the armor? Okay. Then your opponent gets to roll to see if they save, to see if they actually get affected. Like, in idea being like, oh, the shot like went through like a soft fleshy bit that's not really debilitating in any way, so they don't take a wound from it. Like, they'll have to get it patched up, but they're fine, that kind of thing. Like, or it just like took off a chip of their shoulder armor and they're fine, that type of thing. You've got 3 different sets of rolls before you even get into rerolls, modifiers, different things like that you have to get through just to try and get a point of damage on something. And Wesnoth seeks to emulate that by having very high numbers of attacks most of the time, with very low chances to hit and very extreme terrain modifiers. So it's not uncommon for like a basic soldier with a sword and a shield in Wesnoth to have like 6, 7, 8 attacks, but because of built-in accuracy and terrain, to only have 30% chance to hit on any of those attacks. And it is not uncommon for them to miss every single one. And it gets so frustrating. It's one of those games where confirmation bias feels like it's rearing its ugly head, but it also feels like the RNG is just screwed up. Because the number of times that I've run up, or like me and Eric and Dante or whoever will be playing, and like we literally have like 6 dudes between our 3 armies on one enemy, and with all of our attacks, it's like 50 hits total between very high HP values, relatively low damage per hit on a lot of things, and just the low chance to hit. It just won't die. And then it'll crack back and kill like 4 of our things. And it's like the same tier of class, because you can get promotions, right? Like every time you level up a character, they promote. That's how long it takes to get XP. So like, it just gets so frustrating because you work so hard to actually get a character to level up and promote to a new class, but then because of the RNG, they can just get torn away immediately. It's like, I tried so hard to get that. God damn it, just hit it. Just hit the thing, for God's sake. it's compelling, but you need a level of patience that's really hard to reach with this game. Unless you're willing to just throw yourself to the winds, just be like, whatever happens, happens. Maybe we get there, maybe we lose. I don't know, whatever, man. So, yeah, I wish that there was a slightly different way that they went about making hit rates volatile in that way. Like, even you're guaranteed to hit things like magic that avoids all terrain modifiers still only has like a 60 or 70% chance to hit. It's nuts. So yeah, Battle for Wesnoth is an interesting one. I have to do a video covering this at some point, but I think it's C tier because it has its issues. Now, XCOM Enemy Within. We're in the last two here. XCOM Enemy Within, I think, is very solidly A tier. It has issues compared to XCOM 2. Like, it's just one of those first game, there's things that didn't quite have hammered out type deals. But it's also a game where I can sit down and start a campaign, and again, 8 hours later, it's like the middle of the night or dawn is breaking. And it's like, oh my god, I'm halfway through this campaign. It's just very compelling to play. There's very little friction keeping you from just getting into a mission and going. There's not a lot of interruption between different actions or keeping the gameplay flowing. And it's always so satisfying getting your soldiers to rank up, getting their new abilities, doing new research to get new guns and armor. There's always something new happening, and it's a cadence that they kept with XCOM 2, but because there's just more to XCOM 2, more interesting layers of mechanics and different classes. With hindsight, I can't put the original XCOM higher, but it's still an A-tier game, absolutely.
Broken souls. And yet
now,
our fortunes ride with them.
Finally. Oh. Kayazar has subscribed. Welcome, Kayazar. Very good to have you. Thank you for joining us, my friend. Hope you're enjoying your time around these parts. We are going to Into the Breach. Into the Breach, I've had a lot of back and forth on. I've talked about it on the channel before. It's one of those games that has a very high barrier to entry because you have to be so precise with all of your actions. But once it finally clicks, you can just go. Every once in a while, you run into a frustrating situation where you just can't figure out a way to save a run. But because it's a roguelike, it's not a huge deal when that happens. The main thing that keeps me from ranking Into the Breach super high, and I think it's probably going to be in B tier, but low B tier, is how long it can take to get new stuff and then to figure out how to use it. Because you unlock things by completing certain achievements, and it's like you get an achievement which gets you like a medal or 2 medals or something like that, which is like do certain things with certain squads, and just the game might not ever present you with an opportunity to be able to do that with that squad for a long time. It can take a while to get the medals that you need to unlock other squads and keep experimenting with new different types of abilities. It also has a certain element of randomness to it where it's like, I just can't successfully complete this objective with the tools that I have at hand and with the way that the map is set up. Or I might just not be able to rescue this like time pod that's going to get me progression. So it's like you hit barriers where you just don't feel like you can get the progression that you want. And you kind of feel like you've wasted your time a little bit, which is always a rough feeling whenever you're playing any sort of roguelike. That said, the last time that I put a bunch of time into the Breach, there was some combination of wording that just didn't sound right. It works, but that's when it finally clicked for me, and I got super sucked into it for a while. So normally, originally, I would have had Into the Breach ranked way lower, but I've come around on it a lot. It's still hard to get into. There's a reason that it didn't do nearly as well as FTL. It's the same devs, but it's one of those games that if you can get it to click for you, it will resonate pretty well, and you'll have some good times with it. So, okay. I think we're good. I feel very confident about where I have all of this stuff ranked. I don't think I need to move anything around. I'll be curious to see what people have to say about it in the YouTube comments once I've trimmed all of this stuff down. It's still going to be a longer video. There's almost no way that I'm going to have it out tonight. But I feel pretty good about where everything is placed and the kind of reasoning behind where I placed everything. So Before we wrap up, what do you guys think in the YouTube chat here? Because we're going to be done after this. My voice is shot. And want to be able to go hang out with Jeanne. Dinner will be ready in a couple of hours. So I want to start wrapping up here. This has been a great comeback stream. 4 hours later, talked about Japan, talked about what's going on in life, got the tier list figured out. I'm pretty happy with all this for sure. I'm excited to get back into the normal routine as well. But yeah, let me know. What do you guys think here? What do we got going on? I'll read through what y'all have here quick before we wrap up. Canadian says, good list. Stars pushing Iconoclast, and Canadian's been pushing Xenoblade Chronicles for about 3 to 4 years. Yep. Well, that's so you weren't here for this, Star, but Jane and I are going to be moving soon, and I'm actually going to have a dedicated room as a studio now. So I'm hoping that maybe having that separated space will make it easier to get more stuff like that going. We'll see. I can't make any promises because, I'm still working the day job and everything. But it'll be a lot easier now that my setup isn't in the middle of our living room. And we're in situations like this where, like, poor Jane is stuck probably feeling like there's not much that she can do because I'm doing a stream right now. So, yep. I know, darling. You're very accommodating, and I appreciate it. It helps when, you guys throw 70 gifted memberships at me over the course of the stream, or like we get a bunch of super chats or a bunch of views on videos, so we have good monetary investment that helps soothe the beast. But having my own studio so that Jane can be doing her own thing in the apartment and not worried about interrupting what I'm doing is going to make it way easier to do more stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. For now, going to get out of here. Thank you once again to Link Jedi Master for the literal 70 gifted memberships. My God, over the course of this stream. That was absolutely batshit insane. Hell of a way to come back. And thank you to all of you for being here as well. Thank you to those of you in the YouTube comments discussing the tier list in a hopefully respectful manner. And to all of you, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I do so hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everybody. Bye now. I'll talk to y'all very soon. Peace.